Hello, hello, welcome. And we are now here to discuss the ENFPs. Very, very special type. Um, they've been known as the champion idealists in some of the MBTI communities in terms of describing them. And the reason why I think that's such a great term is because they are idealists. They are idealists, but the champion aspect is that when you have extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking, you have knowledge at your fingertips. They are seeking information and they are seeking to make a change in the world. They generally take on unique perspectives that really factor in the person, the individual. They believe in still maintaining a space for individuals to do what they are passionate about. They don't want to operate like a robot, just doing things based off of duty. Oh, this is what you're supposed to do because you're a man or you're a woman or because this is your family or whatever. They are known for being rebels when it comes to thoughts and ideas. They naturally think out the box because everything isn't just based on what's the most rational thing to do. They're also factoring that in with what feels right and what is also best for someone's individual state of being. And so, and because they have extroverted intuition, they're looking at the big picture of what are we doing? Aside from just making the best next move, what are we doing overall? Like, what is the overall point of this? And we're going to delve into that more. But because they have extroverted intuition, extroverted thinking, their intuition isn't focused on one target. It's more so looking at a bunch of different perspectives, a bunch of different targets and goals, and trying to figure out what is the best one out of all of these. Why are we doing whatever we're doing now, and what do we need to do to be better, not just in the immediate future, but the long term. And what they're always doing is they're measuring history. They're using the past. They're using history to describe or to understand where things are going. Because what you realize is things operate in a cycle, and there's nothing new under the sun. And ENFPs utilize that to get a good idea of what are we doing? Is this right? Measuring things that we've done in the past. It understands the importance of morality, the importance of values, at its best. And the goal of most ENFPs is to squeeze the zest and the joy out of life and to live. So they're very fun, playful, very creative. They're not focused necessarily on doing what's been done. They want to a lot of the times leave their own unique mark or do something for the betterment of society. So, they're characterized by their enthusiasm. People who know ENFPs that may have them as friends, that's how they see him. They see him as enthusiastic, creative. They are very empathetic and open minded. So that's what makes them very unique already is that they're able to see different perspectives. They're always looking at the bigger picture. They're looking at the map from a bird's eye view. So anybody that has extroverted intuition is looking at the map from a bird's eye view. They're charismatic, very optimistic because they can see different perspectives, right? So where certain people feel stuck, they can come and provide more perspective. You know, um, and they're very curious. They seek information. They want to know what's going on. They have that extroverted thinking as a third function, and when you pair that with extroverted intuition, it makes them curious about everything because what they realize is that everything's connected at some capacity. And in learning one set of information or data, they can apply that to something else, right? And it allows their world, especially their inner world, to be very rich. So they seek knowledge. Uh, they have an adventurous spirit and are known for their authenticity. So ENFPs are willing to take risks. Generally, they're willing to explore ideas, willing to explore different perspectives, know different people, and a lot of their experience is leaving their center point and going out there and seeing what's going on. Then they come back to home base and absorb and sort everything out. But it's very important that they're able to have experiences to give them more data and information to work with. And that's what keeps their mind churning. They bring a vibrant energy and fresh perspective to any situation they encounter. And, that's why a lot of people enjoy ENFPs. ENFPs tend to have a lot of friends, tend to be very social, very fun, playful, and they tend to be, funny, because that's all part of the creativity. And they also have that emotional intelligence. That's one of the biggest gifts of ENFPs is that they have emotional intelligence because they're constantly communicating with people, but channeling in what they're seeing and thinking, how do I feel about it? How would I feel in this situation? How would I feel through looking at things from the outside in? And it makes them very aware of how other people may feel about things. So they tend to know how to communicate in a way that factors in other perspectives. And that's what makes them very sociable and likable in a lot of cases. So now let's look at some ENFPs. I feel like I underplayed how, expressive they can be. You know what I mean? They tend to be very expressive and fun and charismatic. And I think it's fun to see that in this video where we show some of the characteristics of ENFPs. Russell Brand is definitely ENFP. If you want to see ENFP, look at Russell Brand, and he gives you a good flavor of how ENFPs can be. So let's take a look here at the video.
So I just decided that I would do something that would at least get the attention. Once they got past the shock of the ridiculous way I looked and all that, then they would see there was a part of me to be appreciated. I'm very real where it counts, and that's inside. And as far as my outlook on life and the way I care about people and the way I care about myself.
So that's Dolly Parton. One of the things you can really see there is being authentic. That's one thing that's very important. What was very important to ENFPs is being authentic. And the reason why that's important is because you're getting a unique perspective. You're getting who they are internally. They don't like to necessarily lean on the character that they're playing out because sometimes I can feel inauthentic. It can feel like they're acting. So you can notice that she wants to be connected to her values and bring her truest self and not this curated self to try to gain something. And that's one thing about ENFPs that are unique. In a lot of cases, what you see is what you get.
Now, I've experimented on myself quite ruthlessly and quite extensively, not in laboratory conditions.
Now, this is interesting. He said he's experimenting on himself, not just, let me play that back. Just so you know.
Ruthlessly and quite extensively.
Look at that, ruthlessly and quite extensively. So that lets you know, because they have extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking, they're using all of this rationalization. They're seeing these different ideas. They're using their thinking to see what makes the most subjective sense based on these ideas and what I'm experiencing. But they're filtering it through their introverted feelings. So they bring it back to themselves to get that interpersonal experience of how is myself as a human reacting to all of these scenarios. Because by understanding how I react to it, I now bring insight to those other people because they might be experiencing the same thing. And I think that's what extroverted feelers can learn from introverted feelers is that you don't always know how to help the other person or know what the other person's experiencing by asking them or talking to them about it and just trusting what they tell you, right? A lot of the time you can know how somebody feels because you can look back at how you felt in a situation. Now, I'm not saying everyone has the same reaction, but what I will say is emotion is a universal language. Emotion is innate. Like if you feel fear, it's triggered. You can't control it. It just kicks in. If you feel sad because you go through a breakup, everyone generally feels sad after these situations. If someone that you care about passes or anything negative, you'll feel bad in extreme cases. So if you win a lot of money and you hit the lottery, you're going to feel great. But once again, these are shared emotions that we could all be like, oh, wow, I feel good in that situation. This is what ENFPs are using to gauge how other people will feel without having to ask them. And that gives them a lot of emotional intelligence because they're tapping into their self to get a better idea of the people outside of them. So it's a unique thing. You're actually looking within to better understand what's out there. Whereas other people think that they got to go out there to figure it out. But while they're doing that, they're totally out of touch with themselves. ENFPs and INFPs, by the way, who I'm going to talk about next. But ENFPs, they're like, let me see how I feel about this. And that's going to give me information. Because what you got to realize is your feelings are always giving you information. And that's where emotional intelligence stems from. It's from understanding that emotions carry knowledge and information. So that's very important. So you can imagine when he says that, I'm pretty sure he's done a lot of work on himself. He's delved into his mind, his emotions, the truth about how he feels about things, and not trying to butter that up and just dealing with the harsh truth so that he can be of better use to the people.
Not in laboratory conditions, more's the pity. I could have done with someone in a lab coat to give me a cuddle, and a petri dish would have been useful.
And
I'm
to me,
sure.
it's more about getting people's porcupine needles down.
Right.
You know, which is, I think what I mean is defenses. But I think of it
Right.
more visually like that, which happens more in the first hug hello
Right.
than with a big argument from a smarty pants me.
There we go. So with these types, what we're seeing is they're thinking outside of the box. They're thinking from other people's perspectives. They're thinking in general. Like you can see everyone that spoke presented ideas. They're very idea driven. They're not just talking about what they've seen. They're willing to communicate to get their ideas across in a certain way. And that makes them very, very good communicators. All right. So who is the ENFP? So now the ENFP is very inquisitive. Okay. As we talked about, they want to learn. You know, when you have extroverted intuition as your first function, you're inquisitive. Now, everyone's going to do that differently. Some ENFPs may want to learn, they might learn by playing instruments or playing music or doing things like that. Others might draw. Others might work on business. Like, so everyone's channeling it differently, but they're generally interested in something. In a lot of cases, it can be in a creative pursuit, you know, and that's why even why business or different things like that can be creative as well, because you have to come up with solutions. And so I think one thing about ENFPs that people give a bad rap to is that they're just creative in the artistic sense, or they're interested in ideas and their feelings, like it's just about people and their ideas. But in reality, they have extroverted thinking third, and their extroverted thinking is connected with their extroverted intuition. So their feeling is more so how they feel in terms of, what they're doing. They want to feel like good or grounded or connected to purpose or passion. But when they're not in that mode, they're collecting knowledge and information and making decisions and observing reality in whatever capacity that might be. So they can be very rational and very strategic as well. And I think people miss how strategic ENFPs can be, because they do have the tools to be strategic. Extroverted intuition allows you to see the whole chessboard from a bird's eye view. And then you have the extroverted thinking, which allows you to make the strategic decisions about what you should do in the objective world. So it makes them very powerful in that regard. They're highly creative, as I mentioned. A lot of that is because they have all the tools for it. They're intuitive. They have the ability to manage different ideas, and they have introverted feelings. So they're very passionate. So that generally they're going to use their ideas to help fuel their passions, which will require creative thinking, because most thinking is being done on things that are in the sensory, things that we're already looking at. Like if you want to be a mechanic, if you want to do certain jobs, you're doing certain repetitive tasks to get something done. ENFP, because it's idea based, they want to bring something from the idea realm into the physical world. Well, that's going to require creativity, because there may not always be a clear map of instructions on how to get to something that's in your mind. So ENFPs are all about figuring that out. They have a vast array of knowledge. That's their extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking. Excuse me. Their extroverted intuition, extroverted thinking, constantly driving new ideas and collecting information, because they can only have as many ideas, right? They can only have as many ideas as they have knowledge and information. So what they do is they collect a lot of information, then they reflect on those ideas, and then they start coming up with these new ideas. Then they go ahead and do it again. Let's get more information. Let's reflect. Let's come with more ideas. So a lot of the time, people might think ENFPs are just coming up with these ideas out the random, but what they miss is all the experiences and data that's been collected before that idea has come to the forefront. So that's big. They're very good communicators. They generally, can engage with people about all kind of different things. They're very non-judgmental a lot of the time. because they have so many ideas and thoughts. So they can hold the space for other people's ideas and thoughts. And that's what makes them very good communicators. And a lot of people love to communicate with ENFPs, and they seek harmonious interactions. So ENFPs, they have that feeling as their second function. Introverted feeling is their second function. So naturally, they have a natural capacity to want to be harmonious, connect with people, feel connected with people. And so that's very big. And that's big to know. They're dreamers, they're innovators, and they think big. They think big because they can see the visions in their mind. They can see, and they're passionate about it. They can see where they want to go, and they're so passionate about it. When introverted feeling is your second function, those ideas that you have this bubbling fire underneath that's excited about this vision, and because of that, they draw people in, they share it, they communicate, and it makes them very communicative. But unlike extroverted feeling types, they're not necessarily communicating because they want to talk to people. They're communicating because they want to find new ideas, and they want to communicate their ideas. And the best way for them to do that is by getting other ideas from other people. So they're really being driven by ideas, which is causing them to be very communicative. And that's why a lot of people like them, because they're social. But a lot of people call ENFPs the introverted extroverts. Of all the extroverts, they're one of the most introverted because they're mainly communicating with people for the sake of trying to get more information about ideas. But once that's done, if they are in a scenario where that they can't get much value from an idea perspective from somebody, they'll just go back into their inner world. And that's why a lot of the time they have introverted sensing, which is all about going back to your home space. It's about checking on your body, your home. You know what I mean? It's your safe space. It's about dealing with your 0 point, like where I am right now, and maintaining that. And so they go out into the world, explore ideas, communicate, but they come back to process everything. And when they're in that stage, they can be away from people. They can want to be in their own world, but they have to build that discipline, because in the younger years and some of the ones that don't really develop, they're always going from one idea to the next. And they can be very scattered, very chaotic to a capacity, very ungrounded. You know what I mean? And in those situations, that's where you have a scenario where they are ungrounded, and that's where you get that typical ENFP stereotype for those ENFPs that are ungrounded, that are known for being zany, and that's what you don't want to be. You don't want to be somebody that's viewed as unreliable and things like that. And so for ENFPs, that's the thing. So, but nonetheless, they are, when they do apply themselves, they can be extremely powerful types, and they really have the tools to do incredible things. But it's very important that they stay grounded and stay connected. So I want to show a video of an ENFP, Will Smith, and just so you can get an idea of how their vision is and the excitement they have behind their vision. I think this video is really cool because it kind of shows you that aspect of the ENFP. So let's take a look at that.
Being realistic is the most commonly traveled road to mediocrity. Why would you be realistic? What's the point of being realistic? Just put up a barrier.
Now you can clearly see, for someone to say, why be realistic? All the extroverted senses, or the sensory types, or in the thinking dominant types already, that's like, what do you mean? Like, we got to be realistic. Like, that's all that there is. We got to be logical. We got to be realistic. ENFPs are here to challenge that, right? Because those are their two lowest functions, is the sensory and thinking dominant stuff. So to them, they're like, all right, I know what I'm looking at, and I know how everyone thinks about it. But that is keeping us where we are right now, right? How are we going to elevate things and create new things to make the world feel better about the future, right? Because that's what they're focusing on, is their intuition is the future, and their introverted feeling is about values, feeling good, feeling connected. And they know that if they can feel connected, other people have the capacity to do that. And they want to inspire that. They want to inspire the joy and uniqueness of the human experience. And they can only do that if people are willing to not just hang on to what they already know and what they are already doing. So they can be considered very revolutionary in that capacity. So he's like, what's the point of thinking regular? Because to him, that's a limitation, is trying to be quote unquote realistic. Whereas for others, being realistic is the only thing you can do. Like, what do you mean? There's like, we have to be realistic, but you can hear that unique perspective.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. It's done. It's already done. The second I decide it's done, it's already done. So now we just gotta wait for y'all to see.
There we go. So that goes to show you, like he's in a capacity where he is saying, look, realism is keeping us where we are now. Let's push things forward. And he is demonstrating what ENFPs can be at their best. When they have that certainty, when they trust themselves, and as they develop their thinking functions more, they can begin to collect all of this data and then move forward making really powerful decisions because they have more data than everyone else. ENFPs will generally have more random information than most types because they have the extrovert intuition that can hold all of that information, and they're curious, and they're always seeking different things out. So they can be very, very brilliant if they push their mind. If they don't, they can fall into a scenario where they're too connected to fantasy. Where extrovert, because you got to think about it, their sensory, which is the practical on the ground, is their lowest function. So they can be the types that have all these big dreams, but they never come to fruition. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide right here. The strengths and weaknesses, right? So when we talk about ENFPs, their strengths, we touched on them already: enthusiastic, creative, empathetic. They care about people. They're good-hearted people. They generally have good values. They want the best for people around them. They're not here to harm you, and that's really cool because they tend to not be very predatory, and they're not here to cause a lot of problems. When they're healthy, right? They're charismatic, which can infuse a room. It can be magnetic. It can lift up people's spirits with them just coming into an environment, and they're adaptable. They have that extroverted intuition, the extroverted thinking. So they want to hear what your perspective is. They want to learn from other people. They want to hear different ideas. They're not very stubborn in that capacity where they think they got it all figured out. If they got it all figured out, they feel bored at times. They feel depressed because there's nothing new to learn. So they are natural learners, and that's what makes them very powerful. But also there's weaknesses, right? They can be overly idealistic, as I talked about, where they become ungrounded. When you're so focused on ideas, it takes away time that you have to actually bring them to fruition because you're so focused on your ideas. What time do you have to focus on yourself and focus on, bringing those ideas to reality? So that's something that's very big. They can be disorganized because they're too much. They're doing ideas, talking to people, communicating, doing all these things, and they're not really. They can be in scenarios where they're not managing the sensory, the physical things, your home, your finances, your documentation that you have to continue to keep up to date. Like, these are the things that can happen when they're too lost in their ideas. They can be overly emotional. Let me just tell you, man, introverted feeling is an extremely strong function. It is a very powerful function, and it is a function that you could feel so deeply that it takes over your entire experience. It can literally drown you from even seeing what else is going on because those feelings can overtake and be so powerful. So that can be exhausting at times. And so it's important for ENFPs to understand that they got to stay balanced and grounded and don't let those feelings overtake. Seek out perspective, get more ideas on the situation, create some space so that your feelings don't get so to the point basically where your feelings don't take over and consume your ability to actually enjoy your life. So that's very important. Um, and then they can be easily distracted because a lot of ENFPs can be considered to have ADD. And I feel like some ENFPs have been wrongly labeled as ADD because people don't understand their functions. This is a type that has extroverted intuition. They always have different ideas. That's what God put them here to do, or whatever you believe in. That's what nature put them here to do, is to have ideas and to push powerful ideas forward and to be innovative and creative. So when you're doing that, it's hard to focus on one linear thing because guess what? The functions that assist with that, number one, introverted thinking is a linear function. If you're an ENFP, introverted thinking is your second to last function, period. It's your seventh out of eighth function. So you use it at a very low level compared to other types. And so it's harder for you to just do one thing at a time. That's not necessarily like what you're supposed to be doing. But you still have to do that to some capacity, or else you'll never be able to have to follow things from beginning to end. So you have to master that aspect of thinking. You have to take things one step at a time and stay grounded. You have to tap into that introverted intuition and stay honed in on your target goal, or else you'll become so distracted and you'll become that person that has all these great ideas and all of this passion and this good energy. But then you look 5, 10 years later and they're in the same place, or they're in a worse position. And you're like, what happened? You're so brilliant, but you're so much in your fantasy, you're not doing enough on the ground. And that's where the problems are happening. So you don't want to be that person. And they can definitely be conflict avoidant. When you have introverted feelings, second, um, it's uncomfortable. You feel a lot of like weird energy and anxiety when you're dealing with confrontation or conflict. So they tend to try to avoid those things so that they can not have to deal with those negative emotions. And a part of the growth of the ENFP is to realize, look, man, everything can't be perfect. Like you have to deal with conflict, and whether you need to do some kind of training to feel more confident, whether you need to, whatever you have to do, do it to deal with those feelings of uncomfort. But your growth is going to be in your ability to express yourself honestly and to understand that your perspective matters just as much as anyone else. And don't let your fear of conflict stop you from doing what you need to do to make the world and the people around you better and to make the environment better. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, and you'll become stronger in doing that and realize that there's really nothing to be afraid of. All right. So now, what happens when an ENFP is disorganized, overly emotional, easily distracted, or they're in this situation where they're dealing with a lot of stress? A lot of that stress can come from them being caught in the loop, which we're going to talk about next. Sometimes they can get caught into these loops where they're stuck in their head, where they're constantly having this cycle of feeling negative, and having this negative vision or this negative outcome that's going to happen, and they're feeling negative about it, and they're going back and forth. They try to think, oh, it's going to get better, and then they get a negative vision and they're feeling negative again. And that introverted feeling, when it's feeling very negative and it feels like it doesn't have a way out, they can get very depressed, very low energy. They also say ENFPs are the types where they can be a hypochondriac, like they can have, deal with some sensory sensation that's not good, and their ideas can just come up with these crazy ideas of how bad, like, oh, they can take something small and think that it's a deathly disease or something, because their intuition in their mind is over analyzing and blowing up the situation, right? So this is what happens when ENFPs are in a scenario where they're totally out of whack. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second here. All right.
Show me your blueprint. 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 Show me your blueprint.
Now, what you can see going on here is his introverted feeling is taking over. He's in the grip of a negative experience. It's at a point where it's too heavy for his brain or his to handle, and he's starting to feel so negative, and so there's so much anxiety going on that he's starting to lose it. They can become obsessive and depressed. So the key feature here is when they're dealing with depression, they can also be obsessive at the same time, where they're constantly overthinking and constantly replaying the situation, thinking about it, and continuing to feel negative. Some other types can have the capacity to be like, all right, this thought isn't serving me. I don't like it. I'm going to think about something else. I'm going to distract myself and do something else. ENFPs have a hard time doing that because they have that extroverted thinking that just wants to deal with the objective reality. And their introverted feeling, when it's negative, nothing can distract them because they're having to deal with that feeling. And that feeling is over consuming. It's their first internal function. So it's being felt on a very personal, interpersonal level. So these types feel very deeply, and they can cause them to feel like this. They can be irritable.
Hey. Quarantine.
Now this is interesting. This is kind of some OCD behavior, and there are ENFPs that deal with that. They have introverted sensing as a fourth function, which is all about the past, and it's all about doing things in a consistent manner in their sensory world, having a level of linear functions that like basically having a process, a system that they do consistently. That's what introverted sensing is all about. It's about going back, making sure to do, check on what's going on, and then they go out into the world and explore. But they always check back in. But it can become overly compulsive when they're trying to maintain a habit in order to keep themselves grounded. This is where it gets out of whack. Like you have to wash your hands 10 times to feel like, I have heard of OCD characteristics for ENFPs, where they need everything to be perfect in order to, feel better, right? In order for that introverted feeling to feel better, they want to over manage or over regulate their sensory world. And this is one of those examples. And as you can see, that intuition, that extroverted intuition, and is driving him so much, this idea that he has to do this, he loses touch with his sensing. And look, he ends up cutting himself because he's not connected with his sensing. He's not connected with that groundedness. And look what ends up happening. He cuts himself. So now this small situation becomes a bigger one. And you notice that he continues to trust his intuition. He's just going from one intuitive thought to the next to try to, fix the situation, but it puts him deeper in a hole, right? And you also see the creativity with ENFPs, meaning, he ends up having a spot on his shirt. He's trying to find a creative way to fix it. And what does he do? He ends up using the hand soap and drying it with the hand dryer in order to fix the situation. And that's kind of seen an ENFP, that's kind of like the everyday creativity that they have, like just little things like that. They're willing to try and go for it. Everything doesn't have to be done perfectly, right? Like sometimes they might use a spoon for something that requires a knife and vice versa, because, hey, look, it's going to get the job done. And that's where their extroverted thinking comes in. Efficiency. Like what he did there was the most efficient way to get this done.
Repeat it from the beginning. Repeat it from the beginning. Repeat it from the beginning. If there is any variation.
Now, introverted sensing is their fourth function, and we're going to talk about that in the loops next. But you notice that when he gets out of whack, that introverted sensing starts, that fourth function, he starts relying more on the weaker functions. And you can see here somebody that has introverted sensing fourth as a lower function, but they're trying to lean on it, and it's being utilized very immaturely. So instead of using it in a way where introverted sensing dominant types are very structured, organized, connected with their body, they follow routines. In this case, the ENFP is just like repeating the same words, and he's more so using it as a means to hang on to sanity versus using it productively.
Of these instructions, even to the smallest degree, the entire process must be repeated. Sometimes I truly fear that time. Losing my mind.
And that's the tough part. Once again, you got to realize, because this type is driven by possibilities and opportunities and always looking for a way to, find the best outcome and willing to seek alternative means to do that. But when they get into a mode where they don't see a lot of other options, that weak introverted intuition kicks in, and sometimes it can show them that there's only one linear way, and it's going to be a negative one, because they're not using introverted intuition as one of their main 4 functions. So your lower 4 functions show up as, like demon functions. They can show up as negative functions, and so that this is a great example of that. He doesn't see much opportunity.
And if I did, it'd be like flying blind.
All right, so that's that. We're now going to go to the next video here. I'm sorry, the next aspect, which are the functional loops. Now, and this is going to kind of build on what we were talking about. So now, and let me just be clear, there's 8 functions. And so in these functional loops, I could have done it where I looked at all 8, but I want to focus on the main 4, because the bottom 4 are going to present themselves in unique ways as well as your shadow functions. But if you understand the first 4, that's how it gives you access to understand the next 4 deeper. And I don't want to overcomplicate it, because your main 4 functions is really going to open the door for you to figure out everything else. Okay. So the 2 loops that they get into, number 1, extroverted intuition and extroverted thinking. They can be in scenarios where they're overthinking, or where there's too many ideas and they can't filter them down. Extroverted intuition has a lot of ideas that it's managing. Extroverted thinking is always going out seeking thoughts, different information, different perspectives. So what happens when you overload on that? Eventually you have to figure out, well, what do I think, and what is the one direction I'm going to go in? And that is actually the lower functions that they have. That's introverted intuition. That's introverted thinking. So the biggest work that an ENFP has to do is going to be them honing down the ideas, honing down all the possibilities, and limiting themselves to focusing on 1 to 2 main focuses, so that they could channel all of that energy and thinking into one direction. Because it's like what they say, if you're trying to chase 2 rabbits, you're not going to catch any of them, right? You have to hone in on one thing. And for ENFPs, that's one of the harder things for them, is trying to hone everything in, because they have so many ideas. So this is a situation where they can constantly be just ideas, thinking about this. What do you think about this idea, this idea? You talk to them later, they're still stuck with these different ideas. Over exploring. There's too many things to hone down, and then that's where they can be distracted, ungrounded, not focused. ADD. Characteristics you're going to see when they're totally extreme. They need to balance that with the introverted feeling and introverted sensing, because those 2 say, all right, first of all, how do I feel internally about what I'm doing? And then introverted sensing is the grounded function. That's what connects into reality. What do I need to do on the ground to stay connected to the ground and to get these things done in the physical world, right? And so that's where they have to stay grounded and use that introverted sensing and stay connected, so that they're not too zany and too distracted out there, with all these ideas and thoughts. Now, the other loop that they can get caught into is the introverted feeling, introverted sensing loop, right? And this is a scenario where they are expecting a negative outcome, right? And because of that, they're feeling negative, and then their introverted sensing is keeping them stuck, right? So then they might try to do something to feel better, but as soon as that's done, the introverted sensing brings them right back, and their introverted feeling still feels negative. And they're stuck in this loop of constantly feeling negative, and they can't shake it, because every time they try to shake it, it brings them right back. So that's where they can feel stuck in this pit of negativity. And like I said, introverted feeling is such a strong function. It can overtake, and that's where they start to get erratic. They start to lose a sense of self. They can become very ungrounded, and they can be in a scenario where, they can be very stressed, high anxiety, very negative. So these are the loops to look out for as an ENFP. You know what I mean? And the main way to manage this is to stay balanced. You have to understand that if you think there's a negative outcome, and that's the only way, your introverted feeling feels negative and your introverted sensing keeps bringing you back. Well, what's the thing that's going to balance that out? It's going to be you finding other ideas to make you feel better, and for you to trust your thinking as well. And trust that, look, I trust it. Even though I feel negative and I keep coming back to this space, I believe and think that, better opportunities are going to happen. But the hard part for ENFPs is they don't trust that thought as much as they trust their feeling. So you have to learn to trust your thoughts. Okay. And for anybody watching this, if you're ENFP, go join my Pyramidian membership. That's all about building that inner self trust and that strong mindset to get to the top of where you want to go. And so, but just so this is going to be the escape from that. And it's all about balance. What happens when you're too lost in your ideas? You have to connect and ground yourself. And if you balance these two worlds, you now have the tools to be an extremely, extremely powerful ENFP, in your world. Now let's talk about your gift. It's clear as day what your gift is. Okay. Oh, and before, oh yeah. It's clear as day what your gift is. Your gift is creativity. You are highly creative by nature. You think out the box, and you are naturally driven to be different. Okay. So, with the functions you were given, you were basically put here to insert creativity into the experience of life, to push forward art, creative expression, ideas. You are unafraid to share your ideas, and you are not afraid to explore new ideas, and you are willing to deal with the truth and the objective reality of life, but you're still willing to apply your intuition and your passion into the reality of life. And that is what allows you to end up coming up with real objective solutions that are out of the box that people don't really think about. Because as people might think as intuitive as you are and in the clouds, you are still using extroverted thinking with your intuition. So your intuition always has logic and rationale infused deeply into it. You literally have systems of ideas and thoughts in your mind that operate like a structure. You just happen to be passionate, to have feeling. You just happen to be able to feel in the middle of doing that. And that is what makes you so creative and alive in bringing these creative things into your life. So it's important that you embrace this creativity and realize that you can get yourself into or out of any situation because God blessed you, and the universe and life and nature blessed you with the gift of creativity, unlike any type out of the 16 personality types. And so now, what is your hidden power though? What is the hidden power that is within you that some people see and some people don't, but that is really your superpower? And what that is, let me make it big, is your problem solving skills. See, people don't know ENFPs are very good problem solvers. You see, you have a hidden ability to come up with solutions when others run out of ideas. And that's why you can't be stopped. As long as you keep thinking, you cannot be stopped. And that's why it is your hidden power, because a lot of people don't look at ENFPs as necessarily the strategic problem solving people, right? They tend to think the thinking dominant types are, right? Or the ones that might have introverted intuition, like they're going toward one target. But think about ENFPs. They're looking at multiple perspectives and multiple different forms of logic. And they're also factoring in how people are going to feel in reaction to these situations, right? And they're also balancing that with studying history and where things have gone, because based on where things have gone will give you a really good idea of where things are going. So when they're coming up with problem solving, they're problem solving to really create solutions that will be long-term fixes, right? But that also requires taking big actions in the present to create better outcomes for the future. And that's where people struggle. They don't feel like doing a lot of work in the now, and they keep pushing it off to the later. Or somebody else to do it. Well, ENFPs are like, we're gonna do it. Like, let's figure it out now. And that's what they bring to the table. They are here to challenge the culture and bring in solutions that are unique. And they're very, very powerful problem solvers. They have quick ideas. They have a huge wealth of information. I look at them as like they're one of the types that are like the librarians. They carry a lot of information, but they're unique in the sense that all their information is still there to drive them forward, to put them in a position to innovate in the future. They're always thinking forward, and that's what's so unique about them. So, that is my key. And if you are able to take your creativity to solve problems for yourself, what you'll realize is you'll always have a solution. You will never be blocked. And that's how I want you to live life. I don't want you to see blockages. I don't want you to see limitations, because when you fall into limitations, that's when you begin to get negative, depressed, and you start to fall into those lower states like we saw. You know, when you see a guy like Will Smith and he's saying, look, what are limits? Why be regular? Why be the same? That's what you're here to do. Push new perspectives. Don't put limitations on yourself. You're here to drive things forward. And your creativity, you have to understand, all the other types have a hard time with the creativity that you naturally have. So you are here to give the world a glimpse through your eyes of of the possibility that exists. And if you really focus on staying grounded and being balanced, what you'll be able to do is actually not only be able to create amazing solutions, but you'll also be able to um, manifest the things that you want in your life at a very rapid rate. But the last thing I'll say is you have to trust and be certain and trust your thinking, trust yourself. Because a lot of the time with ENFPs, you have more data and information to work with than other types. And these other types are so confident, not because they got it figured out, they just have functions that allow them to trust themselves more. So as an ENFP, I want you to trust yourself. I want you to trust your creativity. And I promise you, you have a brilliance that people see. And that's why people like to have ENFPs around. And ENFPs come in all different flavors, but you know, you have the capacity as an ENFP to be extremely grounded, to be a leader, to be a natural leader, and to be a caring, empathetic leader that really wants the best for its people. It's not just focused on a means to an end. It does care about people. It does value people, and it wants to make sure that it's doing the right things. And that's what makes ENFP so special. So I thank you for listening. Once again, that is the key. Trust your creativity and be willing to make decisions and trust yourself based off that. And you're going to see your life become more and more magical, and you'll be able to bring in so much. So that's my message to the ENFPs. I thank you for listening. And we are now headed to the next type, which are the INFPs. So I will see you in the next video.